Welcome to the Business of Preschool podcast for owners who want to lead well, grow smart, and build a business that's truly worth something. Hosted by Reue, owner, author, and childcare sales specialist. This show gives you the insight and the inside scoop to run your school like a business and sell when the time is right.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Business of Preschool podcast. I'm your host, Reue, and I am so excited about our guest today. I am here with Tim Kaminski, and he is the new president of TLCCA, the Texas Licensed Childcare Association. He has been instrumental in being an advocate for early childhood operators, owners, the industry as a whole. And so I had him on. He has done so much in Texas lately and even across the US as far as networking with other people. And so I wanted to bring him on and kind of talk about what he's done, what he's learned, and what we can do moving forward. So, hi, Tim.
Hey, Chelsea, how are you doing?
I am great, and I'm so excited. Before we started the podcast, we were talking a little bit, and the big news that's hit the industry is this New Mexico thing, and you're even talking to your counterpart in New Mexico. So you are really not just staying in Texas; you're really looking at how can we learn from other states.
Exactly. Yeah, we just actually had a call last night because so much information was coming out in the news and making it sound so positive and great and wonderful. And my counterpart in New Mexico is like, oh, we need to talk because it's not as rosy as it's being made out to be. And that's always going to be the case with something new. But she was able to share some insights with us and some things that they've got concerns about. And, like we were talking before we got on, the problems aren't state specific, they're kind of universal. And so the more we can learn from what other groups have done that have worked and haven't worked, hopefully that will move the whole industry forward. But we've got a lot of things to cover. So.
Well, and you have been so impactful. So, a little backstory about how Tim and I have kind of circled around. I'm in Texas as well, and I've, been around TLCCA. And so we met during that and we got to know each other a little bit better this last legislative session. But Tim, let's go back a little bit further because your story into even the early childhood preschool ownership realm is actually, I don't know the full story. I know it's interesting. I know bits and pieces. Do you want to kind of share how how you even gotten
Out
here?
here. So our family has had a childcare business in Fort Bend County for over 42 years now. So my mom started it back in 1982, right as I was graduating. So the idea of working with kids or being anything childcare, daycare related had no appeal to me whatsoever. So I was like, good luck to you guys. I'm going off to college. See ya when I get done. And so for really the first 5 or 20 plus years of our family's business, I was not involved in it. I went off to school. I went to school in San Marcos, which is kind of in the heart of Texas, and ended up getting my bachelor's and master's in communication disorders. So I came out of school as a licensed and certified speech pathologist and really thought that's what I would be doing for the rest of my career. And so I had focused on adolescent neuropsych, and I had worked on adult and young adult and senior brain injuries, trauma, strokes, that kind of work. And was at one point traveling all over the United States, setting up therapy clinics for senior housing development companies. And so in that process, I was getting exposed to state licensing and state legislation and policies and stuff, not just in Texas, but in multiple states around the U.S. And so was blowing and going with that till about 2007, 2008, and the bottom kind of fell out in the healthcare industry. So Obamacare was coming into place, and there were lots of changes to Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements, and a lot of the bigger companies, corporate companies, were laying off people. And so it was funny because the Thanksgiving before this happened, I was home and visiting with my parents, and my mom was talking about retiring, but she didn't know what to do because there really wasn't anybody in the family to take over the business. All of my siblings were doing different things, and I said, well, maybe one day I'll come and help you with it, but right now I'm kind of busy. Well, the week before Christmas, we got called up to our corporate offices and they said, well, guys, you know about the changes and we're going to make some changes and you no longer have a job. And so I came back at Christmas and said, okay, Mom, how serious were you about retiring? And
Right.
so at that point, again, I didn't know anything about the childcare business. I knew a lot about child development stuff just because of my training. So at that time, she had one center. It was your traditional daycare type setting where she had bought a house, converted the rooms and garage, started out with about 30 kids, and then over the years had added on to it. So it ended up kind of being a Z shape on the property, sits on 10 acres in the middle of Rosenberg. So, you know, very unique kind of setting. And then 2 after school programs in the local school district. But the business was just maintaining. She had told me she always just wanted to make enough to cover the bills. Well, obviously, with me coming in and having a corporate type salary that I needed to maintain, it was like the only way we can do this is if I can come in and make some changes to the business or grow the business enough so that by me being here, it has no financial impact on you or the business.
Right.
Because I don't want to be taking money out of your pocket. So I spent a couple of months kind of looking at how the business was structured and very old school. Everything was being done by hand. And I always joke around that there wasn't even a fax machine, which just kind of blew my mind. But everything was, paper to pad and terms of how all of the billing was done and the receipts. But also, there wasn't any real marketing going on for the business. It was well known because it had been known for such a long time, but it was in an older part of town. It wasn't in a part of town that was developing. And yet people would come from distances to come to it. And so I thought, okay, there's something we can build upon. And so even the rate structure at the time, I think an infant was like $95 a week or something.
Yep.
Whereas in the other areas, and again, this is going back 17 years, uh, in rural towns, it would be anywhere from $95, but it could be as low as $75 and
Oh,
all
yeah.
the way up to maybe 120 compared to where it is today. So kind of looked at making some changes and stuff. And within about 6 months, was really able to get all the spots filled in the center. Took advantage of the after school programs and really kind of doubled those in size. And so it was like, okay, this is probably something I can make work. But still not knowing that that's really what I wanted to do. I still had people calling me from the healthcare industry, wanting me to come back and do regional stuff. But I was tired of traveling. I used to travel from Sunday to Thursday, and did
Wow.
that for many years when my kids were young. And it was time. So God kind of intervened and said, okay, you need to go do this now. So after that first year, I got my director's license. And then we just kind of continued to grow from there. And so people ask me all the time, oh, you must love kids. I loved my kids when they were little. Sometimes, but it was not anything, even when I was doing my speech pathology work and stuff, I would go back and forth between working with adults and working with kids. But I've always had this penchant for taking things that are not working and trying to make them work better. And as a speech pathologist, that's really what my training is to take something that's not working in the brain, break it down to its most basic parts, and then have to build it back up. So having that as my background, having my business background, coming into a family business that didn't have a lot of business structure, the combination of those two things really started to lead us in a direction as a family business to where today we have two primary centers, built one from scratch a couple of years ago, and then 7 after school programs in our district. So all of that kind of progressed all the way up until 2019. And then, of course, COVID comes in and turns everything upside down for all of us. So that's kind of the backstory that got me to childcare. And then I guess as we're going along, we'll talk about what's kept me here because through all the ups and downs, I probably would have been gone a long time ago. Um, there are elements that kind of keep me tied to it, whether I want them to be or not, because I do think I'm able to make a difference in some areas.
Well, and I love, so you're a legacy owner, right? You came in and so legacy owners are always fun, right? Because there was always the dynamic of some sort of pivot or trade-off. I love that you talked about the no systems and everything paper pencil. So when I bought my first school, it was 2014. And I walk in and, I had totally missed that there was no computer anywhere because I just assumed there was a computer. And I'm like, hey, where's the computer? And they're like, we don't have a computer. And I'm like, are you kidding? I remember they handed me tuition in a can, like a soup can that had been painted and was stuffed with cash and checks and little things. And so when you were talking about the lacking some of those systems and structure, that's so not unusual, especially and I'm in a smaller town as well, right? So just those smaller towns and older centers. And so it's always fun to hear the stories of kind of that pivot and transitioning it. So, we've gotten to, and I love that you broke down that your speech pathology and the way that you work through the transfers into problem solving for business and things like that. Because one of the other things I want people to understand, right, as I help people exit out of their schools and into their next great adventure, a lot of times people don't realize the skills they've learned through business ownership or their other travels and journeys actually equate to skills you can use outside of the preschool.
Hmm.
Or, a lot of times people struggle to see those skills transfer. So I actually really like that analogy you gave. Like, okay, well, as a speech pathologist, I have to think through things like this. I do the same thing with business. And it's funny the way you describe that. I'm like, I do the same thing. Like, okay, what is the most basic core that has to happen and what is the easiest way to make it happen? So I
Exactly.
love that.
And yeah, and in the past, if you go back 42 years, the people that were getting into childcare did it because they loved kids. It wasn't
Mhm,
necessarily that they wanted to have a business, but there was a need in the community, or neighbors were asking if they could watch their kids or family members. And then over time, the people that were good at it then had more kids than what they could maybe handle by themselves. So then they had to bring somebody in to work with them. And so then the program started to grow. And as a result of that, then, as is the case with most businesses, the state gets involved and decides that things need to be regulated, or maybe something happens and necessitates that there's regulations that come in. And so the business of childcare continued to grow and expand and change, but the people that were doing it didn't exactly grow and expand on the business side of what
mhm,
childcare was becoming. And I think that's always the biggest struggle, especially for legacy, like our families. My mom and I would butt heads over a lot of business changes that were going to need to happen. And even today, she is still coming to work every day. She's 86 years old, but
good.
some of the requirements that have changed and stuff is like, well, we didn't have to do that before. Well, we do now. And, what is that going to mean and look like? And how do we have to, you said, pivot? And that's difficult. Sometimes it's even difficult for me because if I don't understand the why behind why I'm being asked to do something, I'm much more resistant to doing the change. And I think that's a big, big part of why we are where we are today with childcare, is that
Mhm,
for the longest, everybody just kind of let other people make the decisions that were impacting the business side of childcare, and just kind of accepting it. And that's the part that never made sense to me as I was learning regulations and I was going through, especially working on my directorship. I was like, this doesn't make sense. Why is this here? And not even really knowing where to go back then to find the
mhm,
answers to those questions. And so that's been a big part of my journey over the last, I would say, 10-year period, is really getting to the bottom of where did some of these things come from? Are they still relevant, or do things need
mhm,
to change? And what I'm finding, and I think what most of us are finding, is that there are a lot of things that need to be changed about the business structure of childcare. It's just, how are we going to go about doing that? And how do we help everybody come along with us as those things are changing, whether they're a home provider, a legacy provider, a faith based provider, nonprofit, for profit, whatever it is, we're all being impacted the same way.
Hmm.
And some of it's legislative, some of it's economic development around us. And if you don't understand that, it's really, really, really hard to stay in the game and stay relevant. And so I think that's where a lot of us are finding ourselves today.
Well, and so I like to say we're accidental entrepreneurs in this industry because just like your mom, and I love the way you described it, a lot of us did not get into this because we got MBAs and thought this was, entrepreneurship through acquisition, right? A lot of us kind of fell into the business role that we're in, right? We don't have the formal business training. We had to get it street smart, conference wise, book smart, trial and error, talking with people. And so we didn't set out to be entrepreneurs. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that not having that business mindset and understanding how we need to be impacting regulations and advocating and lobbying and things has probably allowed us to get more railroaded than maybe some of the other industries that really do come with more of that. This has to run like a business. Right, because a lot of times what happens is when we say, but that's not right," a lot of the child advocate people come and say, "But this is what's best for children," not understanding if we don't have a place for those children to go because we have no operations, that's not what's best for children and families.
Right. I had one other advocacy person one time tell me, we were having a conversation, and I said, I really wish I had a better understanding of how the state budget process goes on and where buckets of money are and stuff, so that when I'm talking to a legislator, I could go to them and say, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution, and here's where I think you can get the money from. And that person goes, oh, no, 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 no. That's not up to us to figure out where the money comes from. That's up to the legislators to figure that out. And I was like, well, I kind of disagree with you, because most of the legislators going up to Austin don't know any more about that process than we do, especially if they're new.
Mhm.
And so if we can figure it out, or at least have some understanding of it, and can offer that as part of the information we're bringing to them, how much better position does that put us in? But again, your typical child care or early childhood advocacy program out there is not focused on the operational functional dynamics of something. They're looking at the theoretical outcomes of a study that's been done. And in theory and in a perfect world, things work out, but we don't live in that perfect world. And so, yeah, the accidental entrepreneur, where you've grown it to a point, now what do you do with it when all these things are coming with you? But I also think historically, and we talked about, we may get into some controversial statements and stuff here.
I'm gonna pause. So I gave Tim permission to be brutally honest, and this is a safe place we can say unpopular opinions. Hit it, Tim.
Okay. So, and again, this is my perspective after 17 years. A lot of times, and I felt this coming into the industry, that there was a lot of disrespect for the people that work in this industry, and a lot of discounting of people that work in this industry. And so I think that because of that, a lot of people started to develop the feelings of, well, it doesn't matter if I say anything, because nothing's going to get changed anyway. They don't listen to me. And again, in Texas, it's a male dominated system within the legislature, and going back 40 years, even more so. Now, we do have more women serving and so forth. But back then, it was like, well, you ladies don't know what you're talking about. We'll handle all that kind of stuff up, and don't y'all worry about it. And so I think you hear that over and over and over again, and you don't feel like you're in a position to. And childcare,
Mhm.
for the most part, is a primarily female based type of industry. I think it's 90+% female based, minority based. And if you don't have somebody who's on your side or has that loud enough voice to carry things forward, then you're not going to see things change. It's very easy to feel like you don't have the power to take control of your destiny in this. And even when I first started doing the advocacy work, with all the things that I know and all of the experiences I've had, I was like, I'm not connecting. I'm not connecting with the people I'm going and talking to, the legislators or the people in charge, or even the other advocacy groups in this arena, because I didn't start out in childcare. And I was this other thing out there, but I wasn't. How could I possibly, as a guy, how could I possibly know anything to do about children? And so,
Right.
again, that's kind of a unique space is for any male to be in this arena at the ownership level or classroom level or otherwise. And so that's always been an anomaly. If I go to a conference or stuff years ago, I might be the only male in the room. And so that perspective of having to prove myself, well, no, even though I'm a guy, I do know about kids and I do know about development. Almost having to prove my validity in that space is the same thing that everybody else who's been doing it forever has had to try to do is prove their worth and stuff outside of the arena of the childcare people that we exist in. And that's been frustrating. I feel like some of that has changed somewhat in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, but even up through 2019, there was still a lot of negating of the people that work in this industry, and that if you didn't have a degree behind your name, you didn't have any value. You didn't know what you were talking about. And that's one of the things I was pushing back against the most is that this is not a arena, in my opinion, the child care part of what we do, birth to age 5, where you have to have a degree, you have to have training, and you have to have experience and exposure. But the degree thing that is being pushed or had been being pushed was not something that this industry is structured in a way that it can support. And
And
so
that's what I was
that's a lot of back
gonna
and forth a lot of the time, but you cannot discount somebody's experience who doesn't have that degree. And there's plenty of successful business people in this world and people in other arenas that never went to college and have successful businesses and put out a good product and all of those things and can run circles around somebody who's coming out of college and is only book smart and doesn't know how to function in the real world. So that dichotomy of what do the experts say childcare needs to be and what do the real life people with experience like us have to say about it, and how do you bring both those groups together for the best of the kids, the families, and the childcare businesses so that everybody is thriving in that, um, and not losing sight of the limitations of the system until we can get an entire society behind it. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later.
So I think this is a great time to kind of segue into this past, let's say, I know it's been longer, but let's focus on this past kind of year. And because I think you've done some really cool things, especially in Texas, with really sending out the rally cries and saying, "Hey, we've got to show up." Where I think we haven't seen, at least I haven't, as clear of messaging, organizing. So maybe let's start talking about your legislative influence journey, the advocacy side of things, because I think there's some really neat lessons we can learn from what you did, how you did it, what you learned works, what didn't, some of those. And I don't know where you want to kind of start that story, but I think maybe if we can start talking about how you actually impacted change and got people to show up this last legislative session.
Okay. So it actually goes back to once when I first got my director's certificate. I'm a brand new director, don't know anything really about the rules, regulations, and so forth. And so I was pretty much on my own. I might go to a training session or a workshop or a conference, but I really, didn't have any resources. And initially, came across TACE, the Texas
Hmm.
Association for the Education of Young Children. And they would put on these 2-day conferences, usually like in Galveston or San Antonio. And that's where you would go to get your continuing ed hours. And so didn't even understand at the time that they were an advocacy group. It's just they were the people putting on the training. And so after a couple of years of going to that, somebody or somehow reached out to me or something came across my desk about membership. And maybe it was to get the discount, to go to one of the conferences. And so I became a member. And then as I got to know more people within TACE itself, some like the executive directors and so forth, and discovered that, they were doing more things than training. They were doing some policy stuff. And my question had always been, why is it that it took me almost 5 years of being a director before I came across this organization? I said, nobody ever reached out to me, nobody. And at the time, there may not have been a system for that, to know that there's a new director or a new center opening and stuff. So there was a bit of a disconnect between them being out there and advocating for early childhood and connecting with us. But they had big membership. Some were just teachers in the field, others were directors and owners, so forth. So then it came to a point where I wanted to start doing some training. And so as a speech pathologist, I had a different perspective. And so that would be unique for everybody. So I started doing some training for TWC through the workforce boards all around the state, started doing some trainings at conferences and stuff. So I started to build a name for myself. One, who's this guy in childcare? First of all, oh, you're that Tim guy, not Tim the trainer. This is before I even knew about Tim the trainer. So I started to develop some name identity out there in it. Well, then there came a point where the NACE, the National Association of the Education for Young Children, started holding these policy forums in DC. And I, had never been to anything like that before. And so one of the executive directors at TACE reached out, and they were going to be able to take 10 people from Texas with them to the conference and ask if I wanted to go. And I'm like, free trip to DC? Oh, yeah, I can do that.
Right.
So I went ahead and went up, and this is going back over 10 years now. And at the policy forum, basically, it was to teach people about federal policy and how to go to the Capitol and talk about childcare to people and stuff like that. And so completely overwhelmed that first year. I just kind of sat there and listened to the panelists and stuff. And then we had our small groups. And some of the things they were saying, I was like, okay, I can see the research behind all of that and everything, but implementation and stuff, I was kind of like, not sure about. But again, I didn't feel like I was in a place where I could say anything, so I kept my mouth shut. But then they took us up to the Hill, and going to the Capitol, if somebody's never been before, it's as awe-inspiring as you anticipate it to be. I mean, it's this big, imposing building. And there's just lots of people everywhere, and there's just so much activity, and you're a fish out of water and stuff. And so they would pre-plan visits for us to go meet our representatives and legislators. Again, you get to their office, and there's a long line outside the door of people waiting to go into that office. And so that first year, I was just an observer. Came back, still didn't really do anything locally. But then the second year, I went back and felt a little more comfortable, knew more people. And it was just really, really starting to get to me what they were saying. And I'm sitting there, God, if this goes through, how am I going to pay for it? How's my business going to afford to do this? I understand what they're wanting to achieve, but I don't understand how I'm going to be able to do that. So whether it was, increase wages, or if it was decrease ratios, or whatever it is, I'm sitting there running numbers in my head, and they're sitting there talking about the virtues of everything. And so there's a point during each session where microphones are set up on either side of the room, and you can go up and ask questions. And so I finally got up the nerve, and I went up there and said, hi, my name's Tim Kaminski, and my family owns a childcare center in a little old town in Rosenberg, Texas. I said, I have one question for everybody. And I said, really understand what you're saying up there and the research you've done. I said, but how the hell am I supposed to pay for it? And the room erupted.
Show me the money.
I mean, everybody started clapping and everything. And I went, crap, I have just opened up a can of worms. And one by one, after I went and sat back down, other people came up, said, yes, what that guy said over there. How are we supposed to pay for this? Because I've got this, that, and the other. And in my area, that wouldn't work. And then the next person would come up and say the same thing. Well, the poor panel were taken aback, because up to that point, I don't think anybody had ever challenged anything that was being presented to them by the professors and the PhDs and all these people sitting up at that panel with the degree. And the thing I didn't let them know at the time was, oh, by the way, you guys up there with your degrees, I have my master's degree and I have my bachelor's degree. So we can go toe to toe on that kind of stuff if that's the game that people want to play. But it was more of just the respect of, I'm running and operating the business and you're not including me in the conversation that you're having. I'm not up there on the stage to talk about, if we were to implement something like that, here are the costs that would be associated with that and what are our pathways for getting there. And so I would say that was kind of the pivotal point for me. That was like,
Mhm.
okay, if you speak up, it's going to get attention because it's not a popular view that you're carrying. Don't know if these people are going to let me come back again. But it was quite the opposite of that, is that as a result of that, when that session ended, I had all these people coming up to me and, can I get your number? And, can we talk more later and stuff like that? And that can be overwhelming too, to have
Right.
that much attention brought at you. And so the next couple of years, I think I ended up going at least 8 times to DC. And the more comfortable I got with it, to the point that the US rep for my area in Fort Bend County, he and his wife and my wife and a whole group of us are all friends and go to dinner and events and stuff back home. And as a kid growing up in a small town, the idea that I would ever even be shaking the hand of a US representative, much less calling them by their first name, and them letting me sit in their chair when I got up to DC and get the picture like I'm the big person up there. That was beyond my wildest expectations as a kid growing up. And yet now
Right.
I'm sitting shoulder to shoulder, literally, with that same person and group. It's called the Fort Bend Business Coalition in the area where I'm at. And he and I are on the legislative policy group for the state. And we've
Mhm.
candidates out now that support business and so forth. But who would have thought all those years ago, when I wasn't even sure if I was going to become a director, that I'd be in the position I am today? So that's kind of what brought me into it. And then the state stuff, I would say, has been more a result of what happened in 2019 with House Bill 3 and what's happened since then. Really, even though I was doing the national stuff at a local level, when I say local state, I don't think I really
Right.
had an understanding even then about how policies were crafted and what was happening in Austin before that stuff came to my desk for me to implement. And the thing that has been the biggest aha moment was that we've never had a seat at the table, and until we do, things aren't going to change. And so that's about the time that I think you and I met each other at one of these things. Was what have people been talking about that hasn't been working and what needs to be talked about? And the second aha moment was that there is a difference between child care and early childhood education. And childcare is the business of providing a service and making it available so that people can go to work. So that's a workforce related issue. The importance of early education and children getting exposed to the things that they need for their brains to develop and mature, so that by the time they get to public school, they're ready to take on a bigger learning profile. That's another thing. But our basic function as childcare owner operators is to provide a service so parents can go to work. And why do parents need to go to work? Because they need to make money to take care of their household. And companies need employees to be able to come to work to produce the product. And if they can't come to work because they don't have childcare, how does that affect everything? So I no longer talk about early education. I talk about, where does childcare fit within the infrastructure of the local, state, and federal economy? What is the ecosystem that has to be in place around a childcare center in order for it to be successful? And when I started talking in that way to the legislators, they're like, well, how come we haven't heard about this before? And I said, because you haven't had a business owner in front of you before talking about childcare. You've had
They had
advocates
Yep.
without business degrees talking to you about early childhood education, but not the business of childcare. And
Right.
that's where we saw this shift in the session before this last session. And what proved to me that we were making that turn is that something called interim charges. For people that don't know, every year before a session starts in Texas, the lieutenant governor, governor, speaker of the House get these items that the governor wants the legislature to focus on. And for the first time ever, child care was on the agenda, and both in the House and the Senate. And it was in the Economic Development Committee, not the Early Education or Education Committee. And I was like, yeah, this is a workforce issue. We have to attack it from a workforce stance. So that's what this last session was. A lot of the policies and stuff that we were focused on was how to help working families afford childcare, how to take some of the pressure off of childcare operators. And so we made some strides, but we didn't get the big wins that we wanted. And again, there's some other provocative things that we did 4 years ago that really got everybody's attention. And I think you have to do that. We didn't really understand we were doing that at the time, but hindsight was like, oh, that was a pretty bold move to do that. And look at all the attention that it garnered for us.
So I'm loving this conversation because, of course, getting to be kind of adjacent to watching this happen. I'm by no means in the mix. I've kind of fumbled my way through some advocacy over the years. Interestingly enough, I come from a teaching background. I was a kindergarten teacher in my previous life, but before that, I was really involved in NEA when I was in college. Like I was on their national student board, and in the Texas, I was the legislative student chair. So like, I've been a part of the advocacy from that angle and from the teacher angle. And so I totally know what those narratives are, right? We want the best for children. We want the best for the teachers, which we all love. But at the end of the day, the dollars have to work because all of our employees need to get paid in dollars and support their family in dollars. Our parents have to go to work for dollars. And so finally having some conversation around the dollars and what is it going to take to make this work? It's lovely to say, you know what, lower ratios make everyone happy. You know what, a 1-to-1 ratio, I'm sure would be lovely. But if you want me to pay teachers $15 an hour and mom makes 14, I'm not.
And we should pay them $15 an hour.
But I'm saying like, we're not making that.
Right.
It doesn't work.
Right. I think a lot of times when we as business owners would go back and say, $15 an hour is not realistic based on the income that I currently have coming into my program. If you want me to do that, then the income that's coming into the program has to be exponentially higher, and that's going to fall on the parent. So if you don't want the parents to pay more, then I can't pay the employee more. And so it's not that we don't, I think people go, oh, well, they just don't care and they don't want to do this. It's not that we don't want to. We agree with everybody. They deserve to be paid more for the work that they do. And it's how do we go about that? How do we increase the amount of revenue that's coming in to the child care program that would enable it to do that? Basic 101 business. You have to have more money coming in than you have going out.
And
until you figure that out, you don't have a business. And so even nonprofits have to have some level of profit if they have a budget to meet, if they have employees to pay, and so forth. And so this idea that we shouldn't make money, it kills me every time I hear somebody say, well, you don't get into childcare to make money. Well, the business owner of that childcare program better be getting into it to make money or he's not going to be able to pay you. Okay.
Well, so one of my sessions I do is profit is not a bad word. Okay. So this is like my anthem because there is a ton of risk involved in being the owner of a childcare operation. And again, my employees want to get paid in dollars and support their family. I have the same goal. We are actually the same in that, right? Like I want to be able to provide my family with livelihood as well. And the way I do that is by making money off of a business. And yes, there is this demonizing of, oh, well, you're profiting off the care of children. And like, so we should demonize doctors for profiting off of like helping people get well. Like, no, you're not. That like sob story narrative's not going to work with me. I'm like, just.
And it goes back to devaluing the work that we do and that people do in childcare. And there's a misperception that because childcare is so expensive, that we're making all this money off of it, And the reality is, this from talking with everybody and working with business, the profit margins are so slim because, 60 to 70% now of the cost is in labor.
At least.
And then you throw on top of that insurance premiums that in the last 2 years have tripled. My premiums went from 30,000 a year to 90,000 a year. And just overnight, and all of a sudden I had to come up with an additional $60,000 to cover liability insurance. Well, it wasn't like I had 60,000 of new revenue coming in. In fact, quite the opposite. And it's so those things that people that haven't run a business or don't understand business, I have no clue about, including the legislators. So the legislators don't know what they don't know. And advocacy people don't know what they don't know in some cases.
Let's talk about legislators as people for a second. So I love that you
'Cause
talked
they are
about, because I want to
people.
give it.
They really are.
And that's what I want to kind of shine some light on. So a couple of things you said. You mentioned having a friend that, they're up in Washington. So one of the things I kind of like to remind people is some of these people we idolize or see as kind of bigger, they put their pants on and use the bathroom the same way we do. And that's my Southern self-talk. But I kind of want to remind people, these are regular people. They have another life that they either had before and will go back to when this is done. They're not experts in everything. They can't possibly be. And when you start talking about some of these policy nuances, just remember, sometimes it's not that they don't care. It's that they have no idea of what they don't know.
Exactly.
And so do you want to talk a little bit about some of your things you've been surprised about that you're like, oh, you didn't even know this was a law or this was our expectations? Or what have you kind of learned from legislators and what they just don't know?
Well, I kind of used that as an example earlier. Session before last, when I started coming in and talking about the business of childcare and using the word infrastructure. When you say infrastructure, people think about roads and bridges and, big projects and stuff. So how would you use the word infrastructure with childcare? Well, when we talked about, all of the things that have to be in place in order for somebody to hold a job down, they have to have transportation. Okay. They have to have support in some form or fashion if they have multiple kids, or there has to be enough resources available to them in order for them to do that. And so resources is infrastructure in all its forms. And so they were like, hadn't really thought of it that way. That's what they would say. Or you have a legislator who, is in their, let's say, early 70s to late 80s, who has been so far removed from the childcare world, or who may never have had to deal with childcare because his wife took care of that. And I'm going to say, because again, dealing with this large male legislature in Texas wouldn't have a clue as to what those costs had been. And so when you start talking about it, I've had somebody say, well, that's ridiculous. It shouldn't be that much. Well, whether it shouldn't be that much or not, that's the reality of what it is. And I always say childcare, it's not that childcare is expensive. It's not expensive enough because it doesn't really cover the cost that it needs to cost. So a couple of years back, they were going to try to lower ratios. And I went in and basically said, if you do that, I have to raise everybody's tuition in that classroom by $30. So what you're telling me is you want to lower the ratio by 1, and that means I'm going to have to raise the cost to everybody else by $30 a week. And you're okay with that? Well, no, that's not what they said. I said, well, they didn't say that, but I'm telling you, that's what the end result's going to be.
Cause and effect.
Bringing those two things together, one group pushing for lower ratios and just saying lower ratios is good for kids and it's good for this, and not addressing the cost thing, us addressing the cost thing. It was like, oh, there's two sides to this story, but I've only been hearing one of them as a legislator.
Right.
Okay. And then realizing that there weren't enough of us with that other voice in their ear. And so that's kind of the big challenge, is understanding that that person goes up there for how many months is it? 6 months every 2 years. and crams all this stuff in, and they're reliant on their staff to give them some direction on what they think their office can accomplish, you know, and what is the governor wanting them to do, you know. And so part of what I feel our job is understanding that process, finding out where the roadblocks are, and then seeing how do we move those roadblocks or move around those roadblocks to get us at the front of the line on this stuff so we can educate them, we can explain to them. And also working with some of the other advocacy groups, which we did last summer, to say, guys, look, we've got to come together with a singular voice on a couple of things. We know we all have our side things, but if we don't have some core things that we can wrap around, and so no matter which of us goes in front of that legislator, we're saying we need this, that, and the other, and so does my friend, and so does my friend there, we're not going to get any action. So we did that, and that's why we got some of the things that we did. But everybody understood money had to come with it. And so we had a hard push this go round to make sure that some additional dollars got put into it. Still not enough, but it was the first time ever that the state allotted additional monies towards the child care budget without us leaving the session and not having any new money put into it.
Right. And so I want to talk about, you're talking about working with other groups. So I don't think it was this legislative session. I think it was the last one. One of the groups, I think it was Children at Risk, got with, was it the restaurant owner or
The
who did they get?
Texas Restaurant Association.
And so, right, unlikely partnership, but that proved to be a successful,
Huge.
pairing of minds. And so one of the things, if you're listening to this and, you're in another state or you're in Texas and you're thinking, well, how do I get the message out there? I think that was a critical move, like realizing we've got to get these industries on our side. And so I love that you kind of mentioned those partnerships. And we saw some of that when I went to the Capitol. I got to see some of those groups working together. And so let's kind of pivot a little bit and talk about, how did you get the rally cry out there? I need owners at the Capitol, and here's what I need from you. And do you feel that was successful? What'd you learn? Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so this goes back 3 years now. So session before last, I was up giving public testimony, and afterwards I was out in the hallway and I heard some people talking, and somebody said child something, and so my ears perked up. And I went over and I said, hey, are you people in childcare? And it just happened to be a group of guys, and it was 3 of them. And they're like, oh yeah, we're childcare owners, and we're with this group called TLCCA. I'm like, well, what's that? And they said the Texas Licensed Childcare Association. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know who you are. I've been at this a while. Who are you? And it turned out that it was an organization that had been formed about 40 years ago when, like, my mom's group started out, and they were owner operator based, and they were doing advocacy work, and they had a membership and so forth. And the things that they were talking about are the same things that I had been stressing about for the last 10 years, but they were in it. They knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
They were an advocacy group. And I was like, man, I wish I would have known about you a couple of years ago, because I've been doing this, but I feel like I'm always on the opposite side of the advocacy call. And so went ahead and became a member, joined, and some incredible people, and just have gotten to be really, really good friends of mine, but immediately saw that there was a disconnect between that organization and the larger childcare community. So what do I do really well is break it apart and put it back together. And so the annual conference was coming up, and you can run for office and stuff. And I'm like, I haven't even been in the organization that long, but I know what needs to happen. And so went ahead and ran for the president-elect position, which is you serve a year in that before you become president of the organization. And so ran for that, won that position. And so from that vantage point, then I was able to utilize that to build my credibility, okay,
Mm-hmm.
with other owners and operators to say, hey guys, I found this group. It's a group that represents us, like people back home, back in my area.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that this is somebody we need to kind of join forces with. And so
Right.
slowly but surely, helping TLCCA to get connected to other owners and so forth. Anytime I was out and about, if I did give public testimony, it was no longer Tim Kaminski from Gingerbread. It was Tim Kaminski president-elect with TLCCA and just pushing that narrative out there to the point that other people that would be either listening in on those public testimonies or if we were at conferences stuff started making that, you're that Tim guy. I heard you talk at such and such. Can I get your card? Can I, And so from that, then starting to create kind of a network of smaller email groups and sending stuff out here and there and having Zoom calls and stuff. And so it just kind of started to grow and grow and grow. Well, when we got to this last legislative session, by the time the session started in January, we had been pushing out a lot of information and doing a lot of membership growth that led to us being at the Capitol in September and November to talk to the committees about the interim charges. And then January 1, okay, let's go. Well, by then, some of the corporate entities, some of the franchise groups and stuff, and I'll talk about some misconceptions I had about that structure, had gotten involved with us. And so everybody said, what can we do? What can we do? Well, we had always had a early childhood day or a pre-K day at the Capitol. We had never had a
Mm-hmm.
childcare owners day or
Mm-hmm.
anything at the Capitol. And so I said, you know what? Let's host one. Let's TLCCA host a Capitol Day, get the owners there in a room together, talk about, what the session's going to look like, maybe set up some bits and so forth. And so we had close to 100 people sign up for it and 75 people showed up that day.
That's
And
awesome.
the room wasn't big enough. I mean, we were spilling out into the hallways and stuff, and it was more than what I could have imagined it was going to be. Everybody, most of the people, it was their first time to ever even be at the Capitol. And so to embolden them to feel like, yes, they have a seat at the table there. Yes, they should be there. We sent one of our counterparts in the organization out with each person to go meet with somebody in their legislative offices. A lot of pre-work went into this, helping them identify who their legislators were and stuff
Right.
like that. We had a lot of pre-script writing stuff done so they could go in, and if all they wanted to do was read from the paper and shake their hand and walk out, that was going to be good enough. But some of the people got emboldened enough that on their own after that started making calls and started showing up and would call me and say, hey, Tim, I've got this set up locally. Could you come down for this? Or, I haven't done this before. Is there somebody that can go with me? And so that network just kind of grew and grew and grew. What was exciting for me is, for the most part, the organization had been your mom and pops, and maybe a couple of
Mm-hmm.
franchisees here and there. But I was always under the impression that franchise owners didn't have to worry about anything. Everything's taken care of for them by corporate, their advertising, their marketing, legislation, stuff like that. And after I got to know some of these new owners and stuff individually, it was like, no, 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 no. We're kind of
We're
out
all
here
on the
on
same
our
boat.
own, and we've been looking for help somewhere. And, you know, we want to get connected with you or the organization because we can kind of see and hear that that's what y'all are doing. And I was like, well, what about your corporate? And it's like, well, they do stuff at a national level. They don't necessarily do stuff at the state level. And I said, well, come on. Well, then that led me to them inviting me to come and give little speaking sessions at maybe their regional meetings. So other owners of that same franchisee hearing information for the first time and stuff like that and saying, if you don't want this just to happen, you're going to have to get involved. And so it just kind of organically started growing and expanding in that way to the point that now the corporate people are calling me and saying, hey, can we come to this next thing that you've got and so forth? And I'm like, yeah, because we need your voices too.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take everybody at all levels, federal, state, and so forth. And it also, when you bring in those corporate guns, whether it's from different business communities or from the childcare world, again, somehow it lends more credibility with legislators. And if that's the game we have to play until we get it on our own, we're going to do that. So building that coalition has been mind-boggling this past year. And we think after our last conference, which we just had this weekend, we're going to see another exponential growth in membership and stuff, especially amongst the business people before we go into the next session. So a lot of it's just being willing to take the risk to put yourself out there. That's the hardest thing to do. It's the scariest thing to do.
it's intimidating. If you've never done it before, it's really intimidating. And so I love, I had done so I went to Childcare Aware and we got to do a day on Capitol Hill in Washington earlier this year. But I've never stepped foot in the Texas Capitol until I showed up that morning to do the testimony at the, I think it was House Appropriations Committee. And that was my first time ever in the Texas Capitol. And I have no problem talking to people. That's what I do for a living. But there is an intimidation factor there. And so I love that number one, y'all almost did that call to arms of, hey, we need people to show up at this date, at this time, and talk about this. Here's what, here's what you should have prepared. And I think that that was so helpful because it gave me a very clear, here's when, where, and what we need you to do. And, there were other people there and I got to, make new friends, so it was neat to get to connect with other people. But that, you I wasn't able to make it to owner day at the Capitol. I was like, I had something else.
We'll
And
have another
so,
one. We'll have another one at the next session.
well, and I'm like, I want to be involved. Right. And I think that, so something that we do see is a lot of us are busy running our businesses. And so I did meet with with a state rep nearby me about the insurance crisis. He's like the president of the National Legislative Insurance. I can't remember the exact. He had no idea we were having an insurance crisis in childcare. And so, you know, just being able to say, "Hey," and it was all from writing a letter. I wrote a letter, and it was a form letter that Samantha Phillips with Comploy had sent out, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to do this," and I did it. And sure enough, it was like, "Hey, we're not the right people to talk to, but we want you to talk to this person." And I set up a meeting, and sure enough, I'm like, "Hi." And so I think that as people who maybe like you that can pave some of that pathway and say, here's what we need you to do. Write this letter, make this phone call, show up on this day.
And you're
I
right.
think that
You're right. We're all so busy running our programs and stuff to find the time to do any of this stuff. People ask me all the time, how do you do it? I barely do it. I mean, again, I have 9 programs that I oversee. And so anytime that I have to leave and go to Austin or go to DC and it takes time away from here, that has an impact. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is we don't get paid for any of the stuff that we do. It is all volunteer within TLCCA. It's run by our board. We don't have an executive director, but when we get the call at 10 o'clock the night before that we need to be in Austin the next morning to give testimony, that's on our dime. It's our gas going up there. It's our hotel stay overnight. Nobody's reimbursing us for that stuff, but we do it because we know if we're not there, somebody else is going to be there giving the counterpoint. And that may be what the legislature takes away from the conversation and not ours. We're trying to do the heavy lifting so that everybody else can stay home and do their work. But while you're at home in your community, those people come back from Austin and then they're back home and they have offices. Every legislator in the state has an office locally back home. And that's the time for you to make that appointment and try to go see them. And if you're scared to do that, you can call TLCCA or somebody else to go with you that first time and get you comfortable with it or give you the talking points. And we don't have a singular state agency in Texas that is overseeing everything that's happening with childcare, from TWC to Texas Health and Human Services licensing to TEA, Department of Family and Protective Services, AG, for the food program.
mm-hmm.
And so not having, when the insurance crisis came up and it hit me 2 years ago in February. And again, I was one of the first ones saying, hey, is anybody else experiencing this? And it's just because that's when ours came due. At the time, it wasn't that big a deal. And I called licensing and I said, hey, are y'all hearing anything? And they said, well, not really. But even if we did, we couldn't do anything about it. And you're not required to have it. We don't require you to have it. And so I was like, well, that's not the point. I have to have it. But they couldn't do anything. And then as the year went on and other people's renewals started coming up, it was a snowball effect. And it's like, okay, we know it's a big problem, but what do we do with it? Who do we go to?
Mhm.
And that's one we're still trying to figure out. I'm sorry to everybody out there that we don't have an answer yet for it, but it was just one more of those things that as an owner, do I go to the state entrance commission and what is that going to look like? And what do I say? And I don't want to have to know that stuff. I got enough on, my plate. But if I don't learn about it, then something more is going to happen that's going to hurt my business. And if I can get it fixed, then everybody else is going to benefit from it as well. But it does take a lot of time and a lot of energy. And there's days where you don't want to do it because you just have had it. And there's other
Right.
times where you get that call from a provider that is thanking you because had we not done what we did, they would have lost your business. Or had we not connected them to the right person, like that person did for you, they wouldn't be around this. So it's like, okay, we got to keep doing it then.
Well, and a couple expressions many hands make light work, right? If okay, I couldn't go to owner day at the Capitol, but I could show up on this day, right? If we had a several handfuls of providers that, you know what? Yeah, I can go for a day. I can send a letter. I can do one meeting, right? Like maybe it's not the ask is we need you to show up to everything, right? Because a
No,
lot of people
yeah,
can't do that. But can you show up for one thing? Right? Can you show up and do that one, make that contribution? And as they see more and more people, right? I think even different faces and different voices make it even stronger. This isn't just an issue for these 6 people.
right.
This is an issue for these 600. And 600 sounds like a lot, except for we have how many license programs
It's
in
over
Texas?
14,000. So this is another historical number that some people may not really understand. Back in 2019, before COVID, we had over 18,000 licensed childcare centers and homes in the state. By May of 2020, we were down to just a little over 6,000. When we came out of the crisis in 21, 22, we were only back up to about 14,000. Um, and the home childcare providers were still dropping off. And so that big deficit from where we were to where we were back to, knowing that everybody was being sustained by the ARPA funds and that those were going to be running out,
Mhm.
those are some scary, scary, scary numbers. But again, if you're only hearing from me that it's bad, or you're only hearing from one or two other people, well, is it really that big a problem? Because we're not hearing so much about that from anybody.
Yeah.
But 1,000 of us going up there and saying that, or getting on TV like a couple of people did in Houston, that gets the attention. So big part, small part, everybody's got a part to play in making sure that childcare is sustainable in the state. And
Yeah.
whether it's
Because
local or at the state level, everybody has got to get involved.
yeah. And, we talked at the Capitol when, we were walking out and it was like we've got to do something soon or, we're going to get pushed out. Like the school district's already trying to do that, and everyone's like, well, if they could do it, what's the problem?
Right.
And I think we all know without having to get into a whole digression of why that's an issue. I think we can all say there's some issues with that model, but I think you're going to have to, if you want to see, you got to be the change you wish to see in the world, right? If you want to see some change, you've got to start having a voice. You got to meet someone. Like I said, I was very intimidated, still a little bit like, okay, but it was kind of fun. And it was fun to see the inner workings and it was fun to see the total misconceptions TWC had about everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was an interesting endeavor. But, we've got to say part of my business is ensuring that I still have a business to come home to. So,
And if
what
if you don't know what to do, simply calling a TLCCA or calling somebody in your area to say, I want to do something. I don't know what to do. Can you put me in a direction? And again, we're trying to position TLCCA to be that known entity in the state that no matter
Mhm.
what your child care question is, or email in. And then if we don't have it readily available to us, being able to push that out to somebody else. And so again, somebody's ready to, get out of the business. Okay. Well, we know somebody, her name's Chelsea Reue. She's in the Houston market, but if you need somebody in the Dallas market, she's going to know somebody who's in the Dallas market. So that triple effect of connecting all the dots together
Yep.
is what's going to move us forward. I did want to say for people out there that are worried, because I know right now the situation is not good with the ISDs and with TWC. We are actively working on some things to bring to the governor's office within weeks of now to let them know what's happened in the last 3 to 4 weeks with the ISDs and what's continued to happen with TWC and the subsidy program. The only reason y'all haven't seen any action on it is because they don't know. The legislators do not know this is happening. And the people there's nobody above TWC other than the governor's office, and TWC is not going to tell them themselves. So we've got to bring that information to them. And so just know that we're working on that. And once we have those answers, we'll put them out there. You were talking a while ago, how do we get all those people to come, those owners and stuff? We have a Facebook page, and there's a couple of different child care related Facebook pages in Texas. I encourage everybody to go join all of them, because all of us are pushing out information and stuff. TLCCA, has its page as well. And that's how you're going to find out before you get that email from licensing and before you get the email from TW. Because as soon as we've got something, we're pushing it out there. If we need you to go speak on child care's behalf, that's where the call to actions come from and so forth. Once you're linked up with one or two of those groups, you won't be left in the dark. You'll get probably more stuff than you want, but it's better to get more of something than all of nothing, because if you're not getting communications, you can't stay in your bubble, in your silo.
Yeah. And one of the, we'll get together and link some of those Facebook pages in the blog blurb, or the podcast blurb, so that people have. And so let's talk about how you've worked with some other states, right? Because Texas is not just in a silo. We're seeing, and what other states do that's great ideas, like the ITERs and ECHRs and all of that, it flows. Legislators get great ideas that, oh, it looks beautiful over here, so we're going to pull that in. So as much as we might not care what's going on in California, we need to, because what's going on in California could impact us, right? Or New Mexico.
Right.
So how are you kind of working with some of those? What does that look like? How are you doing that? Is that a little intimidating to you, or is it kind of exciting?
So again, all of it's intimidating the first time. And so anybody who's watching this going, oh, he's got it, it's easy for him, I still get intimidated by this stuff. I was in DC back in May to go to the Childcare Aware of America symposium. And for people that don't know, Childcare Aware is a child care referral network system, and they happen to have the government's contract for military benefits. I only found out about them 3 years ago because a family came in and said, hey, do you accept this benefit? I'm like, what is that? And so I had to research and find out. And so, but they were having a symposium on childcare, but there weren't any childcare people on the panels. And so we're like, oh, no, 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 no. So our national organization, National Child Care Association, which TLCCA is a part of, said, hey, let's go down there. And she even called and tried to get us on the panel. Well, they wouldn't put us on the panel, so we went as attendees. And again, the first day we played it nice, but the second day I got a question. But it opened the door for conversation with them. We stressed again, we have to have a seat at the table with you guys. You're doing national policies that are going to impact us at the state level. And if we don't know that you're doing that, you may be doing some great stuff, but we can't support it if we don't know about it. But if you're doing some stuff that's not so great, we need to be able to have a conversation with you to say why we think it's not so great. And could we modify it so that both sides end up being happy with it? Well, had I not been a part of TLCCA, which is a part of NCCA, who is in DC, kind of monitoring that stuff, would have never had a reason to go to that symposium, that kind of thing. And so the connection between that has led me to now I have connections with the people in Louisiana. And so the Louisiana part of
Cindy.
TLCCA or LCCA, they have some really interesting legislative stuff happening. And so Jonathan Pierce and I, we actually presented together in San Diego about a week ago about what was happening in Texas stuff. And so we're now on the phone all the time. And now most recently with New Mexico announcing that they had this universal free, not pre-K, but free childcare. That was making all the news and stuff. And everybody's like, hip, hip, hooray. And our counterpart there said, well, no, it's not that rosy. They don't even know how they're going to fund it yet. And they haven't secured that, but the governor's saying they're going to do it. So we just had a call with her last night and about 27 childcare owner operators across the state of Texas and Jonathan and some people from Oklahoma so that she could share with us what their interpretation of this new thing was going to be, what's going to be positive, what's not going to be so positive that they've got to stay on top of as a framework for, as we're moving forward, trying to figure out how in Texas we're going to come up with the funds that we're going to need to try to get people back to work and get more kids into our programs and services. And how long did it take them to get to where they were in that announcement? And it was about a 15-year run up to that. And I think
Wow.
about, okay, I only feel like we've really gotten something done in the last 4 years. So do we still have 10 years to go before we're at that point of having that announcement or something like it? And do we want it to get to that point, knowing that it's not some good? Can we work through all of those financial kinks in a much quicker point in time by getting the larger business community involved with us, like we have with the Restaurant Association and Texas Association for Businesses? And can we come up with an action plan and get there in the next 5 years instead of 10 years? I don't have 10 more years in me to keep doing this kind of stuff. I want more immediate results. And so I think if we put the intention out there that within the next 5 years, we're going to have a sustainable plan in place to help families with childcare, help childcare business owners stay in business, and the business community still be able to grow in Texas because we've got a statewide plan for business growth and development that doesn't have the blinders on and looks at all aspects of what's needed, including childcare. We can get there, but we have to be very intentional about it. And so that's having conversations like we're doing now. And hopefully when people watch this, they go, hey, how do I get a hold of that Tim guy? Or they see me, I saw you on that podcast, so that we can have a conversation about what can they do next to it. I was just so happy you asked me to do this. It's like, I've never done a podcast. Okay, well, we'll do that one now. But if it moves the needle forward, then we got to, I said, put yourself out there to do that. And these other states, we're now looking at doing a joint conference here in Texas with Oklahoma and Louisiana, and New Mexico may come too. But just the fact that 3 adjoining states are looking at, most recently as this past weekend, saying, hey, let's do one big conference. Let's get everybody in the room because all 3 of our states are experiencing the same issues right now. So if that I say when that happens, that's going to be exciting. Yeah.
That will be very exciting. And we'll have to have the bot pod there. Yeah. So Jonathan's great. I know him I've done some work with Louisiana. So I know Jonathan and Cindy pretty well. So, done some training for them and stuff. But I love that you're also really talking about we can't just be in this echo chamber. We're going to have to work with other groups. We're going to have to do some of that shared knowledge. And, the good thing is maybe getting some of these franchisees, they can bring in more of, and I mean, because a lot of the franchises do operate in multiple states. And, also there is a NCCA conference that, they do and been there too. So as we keep going, but if you're interested in this or you're feeling like, what, my business is struggling, it's kind of like you vote with, you got to vote, right? Like you got to do some things that are going to change it. I do want to caveat a little bit into having a lobbyist. And, we have a fractional or part-time lobbyist, but talk a little bit about, hey, I'm a busy business owner. I can't take time off. How do we afford lobbyists? What does a lobbyist do for us? Kind of just, can you give a little bit of that?
Sure. So again, the lobbyist thing was new to me once I got involved with TLCCA. I know that TACI has had lobbyists in the past, and the other associations have that. So working one-on-one with a lobbyist really directly, for me, has only been within the last 2.5 years. And essentially through the membership fees that we collect in TLCCA, a lot of times that will go towards supporting paying for a lobbyist or legislative pieces that have to be written. But also there's what's called political action committees, and you can raise money through those that may help pay for a lobbyist. But essentially, a lobbyist is somebody within the state. So every state has lobbyists that has an understanding of the working operations of the capital and the government entities. And they're typically people that at some point may have worked at the state level. They may have been a legislator themselves. And so they understand those processes, or maybe they were a legislative aide for many years. And so they know how to navigate and get around that process. And so a lot of times you can more quickly get to a legislature via a relationship with a lobbyist than on your own. So there's a lot of controversy as to, are lobbyists good or lobbyists bad? It's all in how you use it and what your intentions are. But we've worked with two really good lobbyists this past year with TLCCA. I've met the other lobbyists for the other associations. Again, they're all great people. So, but me individually, as Tim with Gingerbread Kids Academy and stuff, I wouldn't have been able to afford a lobbyist. And so it's the collection of people coming together, pooling their resources for that. I do know that over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been some groups of childcare providers within some of the franchisees that have gotten together to have their own lobbyist. They are now rethinking that and looking at, rather than spending it on a separate lobbyist, joining with us and supporting one singular lobbyist. So
Hmm.
again, the legislators have a limited amount of time when they're up there. And so if they got 20 or 30 people coming through trying to talk to them and get their attention, sometimes that can backfire. So if we can consolidate, which all of us are kind of looking at that right now. And even with some of the other advocacy groups that we're always not on the same page about, we're all communicating. We're all understanding that how we're working together is what's going to make it do better for us. So again, getting our lobbyists together and say, when y'all are in
Hmm.
there, make sure you mention this for us. And when we're in there, we'll mention this for you. So you don't have to have a degree to be a lobbyist. You just have to have experience. Okay. So one day down the road, I may decide to jump into something like that. But it's usually somebody that, in order for a lobbyist to be good, they have to have a passion for what your mission is. And if they don't, and if they can't talk about it as passionately as you do, then they're not the right person for that particular organization. And so you may have to try out a couple to see,
Right.
what their track record is and how have they represented other groups in the past.
Well, and so, again, if you're really busy and you can't take the time, consider contributing to basically having, contribute to the TLCCA pack or somewhere that's going to represent your interests. Because I think my biggest aha moment with this whole advocacy, you know, my mixings is they don't know what they don't know. Someone has to tell them, and someone has to tell them what they need to do. We can't just complain and say, we have a problem. We have to come with solutions. And you complaining in Facebook groups with other providers that doesn't get anywhere.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The
just
B sessions only go so far.
like you're gonna have to do
Yeah.
something.
I mean, we all need that outlet. We need to be able to vent to our friends and stuff. But after you vent it, it's like, and so now what? You have to answer, so now what? And so um, I think people like yourself, creating a podcast for stuff like this is somebody going, what can I do? Well, let me do this and create another platform for voices to be heard on. And so again, I think that is also going to help kind of push us forward. The hardest thing right now is for us to come up with a comprehensive plan for the state. We've been kind of band-aid throwing darts and kind of stuff, but to sit down one-on-one with the economic development people in the state to say, here's where we think the growth is going to happen within the state. Here are the resources we think that are going to be needed, the infrastructure that has to be into place. And do we have the resources within the state to do that?
Hmm.
Childcare right now, the way I view it, it's no different than the farming industry that receives subsidies and the oil and gas industry that receives subsidies. We subsidize farmers because from year to year, they may or may not be profitable based on the weather, based on
Hmm.
economics that are
Bull
around the
weevils.
world. Okay. And as recently as yesterday, there was a USA Today article saying that once again, this year may be the year that knocks out several more farmers, and that the president is already talking about, what may need to be put into place. Okay. I'm sending that article out to everybody later today. So maybe you can get it posted on this. But the comparison, if you just put childcare in there for farmers, the loss of income and the loss of things out of our control is what has happened
Hmm.
in bigger numbers this year than ever before. And so we do that for farmers so that our food prices remain affordable. If we didn't
Hmm.
give them the subsidies so they could sustain and continue to stay open from year to year, food prices would go through the roof. Oil and gas, the reason we have lower oil and gas prices compared to most countries is because we subsidize the oil and gas industry. And so
Hmm.
it's been determined that that's a good for the general population. We have free public education because we have to educate our future, and so that is something that benefits everybody. Childcare is something that benefits everybody, even if you don't have a kid, and that's the message that has to be out there. The person that sits next to you at work in that desk, if they don't have childcare and they can't show up to work, guess what? You have to take on their workload. And so helping people, and again, we don't talk about it in that way. We don't explain it in that way. And so I had a thought the other day. It's like for every child that I enroll in my program, that supports one other business in the community somewhere. If I'm licensed for 150 students and I have all 150 slots done, that's 150 other businesses that my one small childcare business is
Hmm.
supporting. That's huge. There's no other business out there that has the capacity or ability from one location to support that many other businesses in a community that could be 20 or 30 miles away from where they're located at. That's impactful. So talking about the importance of who we are and what we do in that way. Oh, and by the way, we educate kids too and we get them ready for school.
Right.
But
Well, and I love, you're really looking. So I like that you're framing this in a few ways. You're framing it from a position of we're not broken, poor, pitiful me. Because I think a lot of times some of the narratives that I do hear from providers is, oh, I'm struggling. It's so hard. I hate to say this, no one cares you're struggling, right? That's not what, yes, people care, but that's not what's going to get policy implemented. It's just not. What's going to is when we are talking about what is the workforce behind the workforce? How are we supporting the economic growth in our area? How are we doing these things? These are the messages that I do think, and I think that's why we were more successful when we started that messaging. And I think it's important to remember that it's how you say it, right? Yes, okay, we're struggling this year. Enrollment's hard. Our subsidy payments are late. Our food program kind of keeps getting like delayed and some weird, like, oh, it's going to be delayed a few weeks. Oh, it's released. Surprise. But when we talk, I love the analogy you just gave about the farmers. They have up and down years. Childcare is the first one to see when we are starting to see those, loss of jobs or less workforce, right? We feel that immediately. Parents don't continue to utilize our care when they lose their job. They don't. They can't afford to. So we are very early indicators, but they also need those seats to still be there when the next company opens up or when that economic growth happens. And I actually really like that analogy. I hadn't even thought of it that way. And I like to think of myself as a thinker. So I think there's a lot of truth to be said with that. And so if you don't take anything else away from, this conversation, remember you do have to have a voice. You know, think about the way you are messaging what you're saying and is it going to impact the person on the other side of the table? Because if we are asking for a lot of money, we have to be able to support why do we need that money? What are we going to do with it? And how is it going to actually impact our economic growth? Or how is it going to get people in the workforce to create income and taxes and, keep the money moving.
And you have to understand who are the decision makers. So right now in Texas, the Republicans are the decision makers. So going to a Republican legislature with a social issue is not going to connect. Going to them with an economic business issue is going to connect.
Mhm.
Parts of that, if the Democrats were in charge, going to them and strictly talking about profit margins and stuff is going to turn them off. But if those profit margins are going to lead to support of a social program, they're going to be on board. And so you really, when you talked about messaging, that's what made me think of that. Is we talk a lot about now know who your representatives are, what party they're
Mhm.
with, and what do they stand for, and what message are they going to be able to help you with in the context of their ability to pass laws and legislation and so forth. And that's just being real. That's the things I said, maybe we will say some stuff that people don't want to hear, but that's the reality of it. And so, you have to have relationships on both sides. What we do is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I mean, it is straight down the line. What we do impacts everybody. And so regardless of your party affiliation, you've got to find support and garner support for childcare from everybody. And that's going to be our challenge going forward this year is how do we get everybody to see it like the farmer, like the oil and gas, that it's a public good that we do. And if we go away, what happens to the rest of the system?
Right. So we only have a few more minutes because we have a time limit. We both have meetings after this. I would like to spend just a few minutes talking about this is obviously a passion for you, right? And we all have our different passions and things we can contribute. And, you know, if you have any advice for someone, not just around the advocacy, but you know what? I have a passion for this part of it. Do you have any like words for someone who's like, oh, I'm really passionate about this? Do you have any, and this is totally,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
do you have any kind of wisdom for them?
yeah. Well, I think I told you before. People go, how do you do what you do? You just seem like you're always so busy, and you've got so many things going on. And so, if you're really passionate about something, all the time and stuff that it takes to put into it, to yourself doesn't seem like it's that much stuff. But people looking from the outside in are like, oh my God, I could never do that. Well, you can't ever do that if you choose not to do that. But if you really want something bad enough in life, you have to work for it. It's not going to just happen. And a year ago, I was at a 2-day leadership thing that was being put on, and I hate vision boards. That just, wow, that's not my thing. But they want us to do a vision board, and we're taping stuff to it. And right in the middle of it, you had to write, kind of a single statement of things going forward. And my single statement was, I will change childcare in Texas within the next year. And that
I
was a
love it.
year ago. And so coming up on the end of this year and looking back on what we got accomplished this year, it was like, oh crap, I did it, or we did it, you know? And so whatever it is that you're passionate about, know that it's going to take time. It's going to take energy and effort. It'll be worth it. There will be ups and downs and times where you just want to walk away from it, but surround yourself with other people that are just as passionate, and it makes the journey a little bit easier. So, and don't be afraid to talk about what you're passionate about. A lot of people kind of keep that stuff to themselves, you know, or, oh, people think I'm stupid if I say that or, want to do that. Who cares what anybody else thinks? If you feel strongly about it and you think you can make those changes, start taking steps towards that. Let the naysayers stay on the outside. I don't like to be told something can't be done. No is the worst thing you can tell me because I'm going to figure out one way or the other. I tell teams of people that I work with, we're going to get there wherever there is. I don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but we don't have an option to not get there. And so I kind of always lead with that when I'm down and I'm just like, man, this is just not worth it anymore. So I try to remind myself of that. And those are the things that keep me going with what we're doing right now. So hopefully that'll resonate with some other people out
Yeah.
there.
I love that. And I've got to say, thank you so much, Tim, for taking the time because you've got calls both yesterday and today around advocacy, not just running your business. And so, I'm so happy that we do have, those change agents and thought leaders, people leading the way. And that's why like you were on my list of like, okay, I know I'm going to see you at TLCCA, so I'm going to like corner you and be like, hey, I need you on the podcast. And I'm so glad because this is like everything I hope for and more. I wanted to get the conversation starting. Honestly, I kind of hope it's not the last time we're on here. I'd love maybe later, closer to when we maybe need to do something, kind of giving more specific guidance. Here's some talking points. Here's what we could say. Here's how we can promote this message. I'd be totally down for that. We're all about the business of preschool here. Again,
Yeah.
it's not the leadership or the best practices. It's the business because we've got to mind our business or we're going to be out of business.
Keeping the
We've
door
got
open.
to start working together. We cannot be in our silos. And I love that we were able to sit down and have this conversation and take the time to do that. And to anyone out there listening, like I said, I'm going to put links in the bio of this for Texas. And, if you have a state association in your state, and please send it to me, I'll add it to there because rising tides raise all ships. And we're going to have to work together across state lines in order to really to get the change we want. So thank you, Tim, for
Thank you
coming.
for having
And
me.
yes, this has been so fun. And I look forward to our next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to the Bot Pod. For free tools, resources, or to connect with Chelsea about selling your childcare business, visit chelseareue.com. That's CHELSEAREUE.com. Be sure to subscribe and share this episode with another owner who could use a little less stress and a lot more strategy. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.